It is wonderful to be back in South Africa, and I thank President Ramaphosa and Minister Lamola for receiving me today. As we speak, we are witnessing the reshaping of the Middle East, with the changes in the correlation of forces among the key regional actors, with the immense tragedy of the Palestinian people, whose right for self-determination and whose right to have their own state must be constantly reaffirmed. But we also see some signs of hope, and signs of hope namely coming from the end of the Syrian dictatorship. The UN is totally committed to supporting a smooth transition of power with an inclusive political process in which the rights of all minorities will be fully respected, and paving the way towards a united, sovereign Syria with its territorial integrity fully re-established. My special envoy, Geir Pedersen, is engaging all key actors to contribute to these objectives, and I fully trust the Syrian people to be able to choose their own destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here in South Africa on a mission of solidarity and a mission for justice. And I'm here at a critical time as South Africa assumes the presidency of the G20. This continent's potential is without question. Africa is home to a young and growing population, rich cultural and natural diversity, and a tremendous entrepreneurial spirit. But this enormous potential continues to be held back by injustices that are deeply rooted in the history of colonialism. Injustice in today's global financial system, which loads countries with debt service costs while denying them access to sufficient low-cost financing to fight poverty, inequality and hunger, and advance the Sustainable Development Goals. Injustice in worsening climate chaos, which Africans did virtually nothing to cause, that fuels everywhere in Africa floods, storms, hunger, and deadly droughts. I stand side by side with President Ramaphosa and the people of Africa in this fight for justice on all fronts. Africa needs financial justice. In September, world leaders adopted the Pact for the Future. And the Pact includes commitments for ambitious reforms to make the international financial architecture representative of today's global economy and put the needs of developing countries front and center. It calls for action to move forward with an SDG stimulus, to substantially increase the lending capacity of multilateral development banks, to make them bigger, bolder, and better to support developing countries, and to mobilize more international and domestic resources, public and private, for vital investments. Last week, I appointed a group of leading experts to galvanize international support for action on debt, and I'm delighted that Trevor Manuel will be part of this important work. Second, Africa needs climate justice. The continent stands on the front lines of the climate crisis. Despite causing minimal emissions, climate change is pummeling your people and pounding your economies. Africa is warming faster than the global average. We must limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius to stop this crisis from spiraling even further out of control. By next year, countries must deliver new economy-wide national climate action plans, the so-called NDCs, aligned with 1.5 degrees. And as the biggest emitters, the G20 must lead the way. These new plans must cover all emissions and the whole economy, accelerate fossil fuel phase-out, and contribute to the energy transition goals agreed at COP28. And developed countries must also support emerging economies with technological capacities and know-how to drastically reduce fossil fuel consumption and accelerate the renewables revolution swiftly and fairly. And this means creating innovative models of international cooperation, such as the Just Energy Transition Partnership that South Africa has been the first pioneer, and that has been afterwards copied in several countries in other parts of the world, namely in Asia. And this also means developed countries fulfilling their finance commitments by keeping their promise to double adaptation finance and meaningfully contributing to the Loss and Damage Fund. There is a story that not many people know. When the Loss and Damage Fund was created, there were a few pledges. And those pledges represented exactly the same amount that corresponds to the yearly salaries of the 10 best players, best football players in the world. This gives an idea that when we talk about loss and damage fund, we must talk about serious things. This example shows that there is a lot that must be done to make sure that the loss and damage fund effectively supports developing countries. Throughout, the world must help Africa build green economies anchored in renewable energy. It is an absurdity that Africa is home to 60% of the world's best solar resources, but only 2% of global investments in solar power. We must change this, and we must ensure that Africa's critical mineral resources that can power the renewables revolution worldwide benefit Africans first and most. We cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. The UN panel on critical energy transition minerals, co-chaired by South Africa, identified a set of principles and recommendations to empower communities, create accountability, and ensure that clean energy drives equitable and resilient growth with maximum added value for producing countries, instead of exporting raw materials with very low value. Africa also needs technological justice. Africa cannot be left behind in the technological revolution or be denied a voice as the world develops guardrails to harness the benefits of this technology and minimize the risks. Artificial intelligence is a perfect example. The Global Digital Compact, adopted in September, includes the first universal agreement on AI governance that brings every country to the table. It calls for an independent international scientific panel on AI and initiating a global dialogue on the governance within the United Nations. And it requests options for innovative voluntary financing for AI capacity building in developing countries, for them not to be left behind. And fundamentally, Africa also needs the justice that only peace can bring. The United Nations will keep working to prevent and diffuse the conflicts that plague the continent in close cooperation with African regional organizations. This includes the nightmare in Sudan. We need all parties silencing the guns and committing to a path towards sustainable peace and accountability for the Sudanese people. We also strengthen our collaboration to advance human rights and counter terrorism, as well as violent extremism. The UN Security Council's recent resolution to support African-led peace operations is a welcome step towards strengthening our partnership. And we must heed the pact for the future's call to explore expanding representation on the UN Security Council, a glaring example of injustice in the international peace and security architecture. Africa remains without one single permanent member of the Security Council, which is completely unacceptable. Ladies and gentlemen, as this year draws to a close, I have a simple message. 2025 must be a year of justice for Africa. And I look forward to working with the G20 presidency of the South Africa to help deliver justice for the people of this great continent. And at the same time, we will be fully supportive all South Africa initiatives in its role for mediation, in its role for justice, not only in Africa, but in so many other parts of the world.